Did the Coldcard hack actually change Bitcoin, or did it just reveal something that was already true? In this episode of Bitcoin for Millennials, I talk with Zach Herbert, CEO of Foundation Devices, about the long-term impact and implications of the Coldcard exploit. We talk about open source software, trust, the hard trade-offs of ownership versus convenience, and why making security actually usable might decide whether Bitcoin stays sovereign or slowly drifts toward easier options. I've been thinking about this nonstop since the news broke. If we want this stuff to work for normal people, not just the hardcore maxis, this is the conversation I've been wanting to have. If you're enjoying my content, it would mean a lot to me if you could subscribe to the channel and like my video to support my journey. Thanks a lot. Now let's dive in to this episode. All right, Zach Herbert, welcome back, I have to say, to Bitcoin for Millennials. It was a long time since we spoke.
Yeah, thanks. Great to be here. I think it's been a couple of years, maybe.
Yeah.
But I wish it was under happier circumstances.
Yeah, for sure. I think you were one of the first like 20 guests or something, and this
Mhm.
is going to be episode 270. So
Wow.
we've come some way. But yeah, maybe for the people that don't know you yet or what you're building with Foundation, maybe you can give a quick introduction.
For sure. Yeah. So I'm Zach. I'm co-founder and CEO at Foundation. We make tools that allow you to secure your entire digital lives. But our main product, and we're on our third generation product right now, is Passport, more specifically Passport Prime. And it's we don't call it a hardware wallet actually anymore. We call it human authority hardware. But one of its key capabilities, of course, is secure offline storage of your Bitcoin. And we have made two other generations of hardware that many thousands of Bitcoiners out there use, uh, both Passport Founders Edition and Passport Core. We helped pioneer that QR air gap back in the day. And I think we're building some pretty cool stuff now to try to build more of an open platform for all the developers and companies in the industry to build off of on the hardware side. So, of course, some timely events that we'll be able to talk about, and I'll be able to give my perspective from from Foundation's point of view.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you. So, with this cold card situation, obviously there's a lot of speculation. You have some history
Yeah,
with issues with Coldcard, right? They were first they were open source, uh, taken from another open source, right? Modified for them. Then you used some stuff for Foundation, and so you have like a longer history, at least
yeah,
interacting with them, right? And there's a lot of speculation about like, what kind of attack was this, right? Like, was this an engineering oversight? Was this a malicious, built in something? Is this like a nation state level effort? Patiently waiting for the right moment.
yeah.
Um, what are your thoughts?
My best, um, my best guess right now, just based on all the facts out there, is that this was just gross negligence, from the cold card team, right, from a specific manufacturer. And I like to get pulled into the conspiracy theories, but I think all the facts show right now that this bug was introduced, and it was likely introduced unintentionally. Should never have been introduced, right? This is a C generation, entropy generation is at the core of any hardware wallet or any Bitcoin or crypto wallet, right? Actually using random numbers to generate seed words and make sure that it's sufficiently random. That's just at the core of the entire. It's like the number one thing that you got to do, and you got to make sure works. I haven't seen anything that points to any kind of conspiracy theories. I mean, I know people have talked about the timing of this. There's been some weird stuff with like the identity of the CTO and contributions under a pseudonym that also belong to the CTO. And I've been posting some stuff as I find out about it. People have been DMing me some crazy things, and I
Mm.
just think it's important that like when this kind of thing happens and so many lives are affected, it can be almost like comforting to turn to the conspiracy theories and to try to start speculating. But my best guess is this was just negligence. It's a bug that was introduced, and it probably not too many eyes on the code over the years. We could talk about why that is, And with this AI world, I think the models have only just gotten to their current capabilities in the last several weeks, where you could point a frontier model at the code base and actually have it spit out this bug. I think if you looked at it a few months ago, I don't think you would have found it with the AI models unless you really guided it and spent a lot of time there. So I think it's a combination, right? There was this bug, and I think the AI models have now gotten good enough, and specifically the open weight models, from out of China, have gone good enough without cyber restrictions, where someone out there was able to find this and start exploiting it. And then once everyone figured out what it is, right, it's become this cascade.
Yeah. I really enjoyed your public response. It was also the reason why I reached out to talk to you. I really thought it was very detailed and very proactive on, way more testing, future AI review disclosure, right? Like, and actively doing that basically, right? Because I think the conversation that is coming from all of this is, everyone says don't trust, verify, but no one ever really verified this extremely uh, basic functionality, like you said, right, of a wallet. I heard someone say the analogy, it's like, you're getting in your car, your brakes are broken, but the car is like, you can still drive.
Mm.
And some people said, like, if the device would recognize that there wasn't a proper random number generation, it shouldn't even continue, right? But this, to my understanding, was kind of like the bug, right? It had a
Yeah.
fallback, so it was like, okay, it's working, and so
Yeah.
it continued. But the fallback was the extremely basic version of it, which was obviously guessable, right? So,
Mm.
um, in terms of transparency, I find that interesting topic. Like on one side, and I want to talk about open source FOSS. Um, do you believe that a level of that level of transparency is now like the new standard, or like how
Mm.
do you think about that?
Well, let's game plan it out. Let's think about the different scenarios. And I was gonna write, and I might still write like a blog post or something about this in the coming weeks. Like, let's think about what would have happened in three scenarios. Scenario one, we already know. The code was not open source, but it was source available, right? They changed that license in early 2021. What that meant was that technically the code was publicly available on the GitHub repo, but no one was building on it. The only company that was using that code was CoinKite for Coldcard. And the code was not licensed, both the Coldcard code and specifically this libNGU, which is like the library that was contributed by this pseudonymous developer named Switch, or with a K. It's like I don't know how to say it, Swick or something. Um, so even that code was under a made up license that was not a FOSS license. It was something like the for Bitcoin use only license, if I recall, was like the name of it. So no one was building on that code. We see what happened in that scenario. And I'm not saying that was the sole reason why no one found it. It's totally possible that if it was FOSS under a license, if a single other company had built on that library, for example, there's a
Yeah.
much higher chance that someone would have caught it earlier. And then additional, so anyway, so that's like scenario number one, right? Source available. Let's do scenario number two. Closed source code from Coldcard. There's other hardware wallets out there that are closed source as well, right? Like Ledger. What would this attack have looked like if it was fully closed source? Now, someone may have still found this vulnerability. So that what the closed source advocates would say is they would say, well, there's a much lower likelihood that anyone would have found this vulnerability. But that's not how it works in the real world. Maybe there's an employee at Microsoft that has access to the private GitHub repo and like sees something.
Yeah.
Maybe there's an employee at the factory provisioning the firmware, or a CoinKite employee, or someone who's malicious, or maybe a security researcher is able to dump the firmware off the chip, which happens all the time. For these closed source things, you hook it up to things, you can voltage glitch it, you can dump the firmware off the chip. And now with AI, you can quickly analyze it. So let's say someone somewhere, some bad actor found this vulnerability, but the code was closed. No one would have had any idea what the cause was. there would have been mass panic.
Mm.
No one would have been able to find it. All this whole red team, these security researchers, everyone who's been actively working for the last week on trying to, warn everyone, notify everyone, explain what happened. There would have been pure panic. And I think one of the really interesting things that happened is that multiple parties figured it out within minutes or hours what the root cause was, and were therefore able to help users get to safety, save a lot of people's funds. So that's
Yeah.
the scenario. I think if it's closed source, I don't think that solves the problem. I think it just restricts the knowledge of the vulnerability to a dramatically smaller, population, and makes it harder to figure out. Um, I think the still the correct approach, and like the hope for the industry, is the FOSS, right? The free and open source software approach, where you want to share libraries. You want hardware wallet companies to collaborate. You want companies to collaborate with security researchers. Like at Foundation, within our Bitcoin app, we're using BDK, which is a project by Block. We're using Rust Bitcoin, which is another popular open source, project. We're not the only companies using this stuff, right? And of course, we've built a lot of stuff on our own, but that stuff is also free and open source, and anyone is welcome to look at that or build on that. And so I do still think that in this world of AI assisted exploits and hacks and everything that we're seeing and we'll see, I do think that the best of the three scenarios is still open source. And I'm not saying any scenario is perfect, but I strongly believe that that is the more of the longer term, more the longer term solution that gives the highest chance that an event like this is not going to happen.
Most people stop too early with Bitcoin. They buy it, maybe move it to a wallet, and think they are done. But they're not. The real questions are how you're securing it, how private your setup is, and whether you're verifying your own transactions or trusting someone else. And what happens to your Bitcoin when something happens to you. This is the layer that most people ignore, and it's the most important one. That's why I've been working with the Bitcoin Way. They help you set up self-custody properly, including privacy, cybersecurity, inheritance, and even running your own node. And they do it without ever touching your Bitcoin. They're not a custodian, they're your support team. If you're serious about this like I am, go to thebitcoinway.com/Bram, that's BRAM, to book a free call. They'll walk you through your setup, personalize everything to you, and help you get a much stronger position very quickly, whether you're a beginner or more advanced. That's thebitcoinway.com/Bram. Yeah. Well, there have been some issues, right, with some open source projects. Just in general, I want to say, like, more
Mhm.
many eyes also create a larger attack vector in that sense, right? But I think as you're saying, like the more like source available means you can view it, right? And
Mhm.
and being free and open source software means you can also use it, right? So if
Mhm.
more
Yeah.
companies use the actual code or they run into their own bugs in their context, right, um, they can commit fixes to the general GitHub, right, and everyone else who is working with set piece of open source software can then actually review it, and it can be merged, right.
Yeah.
um, is this for you like the core difference, what you just described between the trade-offs between it, right? Like I've also seen some people say, well, Ledger is closed source, but Ledger raised I don't know how many hundreds of millions of funding. I don't even know how much, right? So people are saying, well, that's a big company and they have audits and et cetera, right? There's so many people working there. Like, do you think that's actually a valid argument, or maybe a broader question, right? Also, in the age of AI, where you would actually want to have more eyes looking at it, because by definition, more AI eyes, right? Like more agents are looking at any software, just like the Bitcoin Red team is now using the
Mhm.
models to actually
Yeah.
audit a lot of libraries. I just wonder what you think. Like, there's obviously, I think the word trade-off is like the key word that has
Yeah.
been coming from this whole Coldcard thing, not in terms of only of like your own security, but also in terms of this. So from your perspective, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. I wish I had a really clear 100% confidence answer, firstly, and I don't. And so I don't want to pretend like I do. Ledger, for example, is well funded. I think they raised at least a couple $100 million. Their valuation is like probably around $1.5 billion or so. They have a lot of people working on it. They have a great security team. You know, they do responsible disclosures and reports. That's their the donjon, or however you say it. Um, they do responsible disclosure and reports to many of the other hardware wallet companies. They did one for Coldcard a few years ago. I don't remember what it was, but it's a great security team. But we have this don't trust but verify philosophy, and it's like a driving philosophy behind Bitcoin, especially. And humans are you know, they're not infallible, right? Like, humans can make mistakes, and just because there's a huge team at Ledger, you know, working on this, does not mean that there hasn't been something that they missed. Does not mean that there's not some dependency that they're building on, because like, they're building on effectively 30-year-old smart card technology. So it's not even just their code. It's like they're relying on like the chip vendor to also be following through, and they don't have insight into everything that's happening in the chip itself necessarily. It's like they're writing software to use that chip made by ST Microelectronics, which is a big, you know, chip company, writing software to use that to the best of their ability. But there's a lot of different companies involved. There's a lot of black box code. And when there's black box code or black box chips, you never know. It could be an honest mistake. It could be some nation state thing with smart card chips, because it's all black box stuff. And I think the Bitcoin attitude is don't trust, verify. And I think that the events of the last several days have helped expose that many folks in the Bitcoin media have said those words, but they didn't necessarily practice, you know, those words and practice what they preach. And so I I still think, if you were to draw up the pros and cons list for these different models, that the free and open source one at least allows the most eyes to be on it. And then yes, there may be some tumultuous cybersecurity events over the next couple of years. There may be a lot of AI assisted exploits and vulnerabilities, but there's also going to be a lot of code hardening because of this, right? There's going to be like teams like Foundation and other teams, every team in the space basically right now is using AI in order to harden their code as well. And I do think that the good guys are smarter than the bad guys overall. And I think that, you know, we can harden it enough where it won't be too much of an issue. The only other thing I would say is, like, this is the worst kind of vulnerability or bug that can exist, because let's say there was a bug with a hardware wallet security, right? Let's say like there's some bug, there's some exploit. The great thing about having a hardware wallet or a hardware wallet like device is that it's outside the blast radius of your internet connected phone or computer. And so the message has been, well, even if there was a bug, like, you know, Trezor didn't have a secure element for years. So like, technically someone could steal your Trezor, take it to the lab, take it apart, you know, extract information off of there. But they needed physical possession of your device. And like, it makes it impossible to carry out these types of attacks that we saw last week. If you need physical possession, you can't just
Yeah.
go magically steal money from thousands or tens of thousands of people. So this was just like the worst possible kind of attack. And so I feel confident that, like, if all the hardware wallet or wallet makers are ensuring that the entropy, the source of randomness is hardened, that, like, will we see bugs? Will we see vulnerabilities? Yes. Will we patch them quickly? Yes. Would you be able to do this kind of mass remote theft type event? No, right? Not, this is a very specific case, and that's why the cold card guys even named it years ago, right? They called it a retirement attack because of how you would be able to just kind of instantly, right,
Hmm.
seize all this money en masse, and you could just like disappear, right?
Yeah. Well, I think that comment, right, is something that sparked a lot of conversation. I'm
Yeah.
thinking about Hamas pager explosion thing, right? Like
Yeah.
where it's kind of like a man in the middle type attack, or not even like the Israelis put up this whole company that made the
Mhm.
pagers and all these things, right? Um,
Yeah.
this is the only thing why I think it could be more malicious is what you're describing. This is probably the only like way to get, well, predict what type of data would be on the hardware device, right? Because you're actually
Mhm.
helping in creating the seed in a more narrowed way, right? So you can kind of reverse engineer that back. But I mean, this is what I think is the appeal in general of the
Yeah.
hardware wallets, right? It's just like it's offline, it's air gapped, and all these things. So this probably seems like the only actual thing that you could do if you would pull a an retirement or an exit
It's the
thing.
worst one. Yeah, it's
Yeah,
by far the worst one. It's like
right. Yeah, exactly.
it's the worst possible scenario anyone could imagine
Yeah.
for the hardware wallet space. Yeah.
So, how do you think the Bitcoin industry should update the threat model? Basically, now
Mhm.
that AI can just rapidly audit all the large code bases, right? All the libraries that that projects are using. I feel like on one side, this is horrible, 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 horrible on one side, and on the other side, it's just a very interesting thing that happens, and seeing the reaction, it feels like Bitcoin as a technology and all these implementations are like at the tip of the spear, and like something
Yeah.
like this is very public in a sense, right?
Mhm.
So yeah, how do you think about that? Like it sounds very basic, right? Run your code base through through an AI
Mhm.
cyber type model. Is it
Yeah.
that basic, or totally not? Like, what is your experience?
I think it is somewhat basic, which is also one of the most unfortunate things about this attack, which is that y- an AI model is not guaranteed to find every vulnerability or bug in the code base, especially if the bug was placed there like intentionally, right? If you were like malicious and you were intentionally trying to obfuscate something. But if you run your code base against the the top frontier models, like let's say right now that's Claude Fable, or if you have Mythos access, that's GPT 5.6 Sol with Cyber access. And now it looks like that's Kimmy. Though I don't think Kimmy is as good as those other two, but Kimmy will do stuff that the other ones won't let you do sometimes. If you do that, and like at Foundation, we have been doing that, but we haven't been doing it like structurally tied to our software releases. We've been doing like audits, our CTO tags the whole team one night. Like, I just ran it against Fable because a new model just came out, and like, here's a giant list of things to look at. You can build it in structurally into your development process. So like, we're releasing today a very minor release to our Passport Prime operating system, KOS, and we're showing in the release notes which models analyzed it
Mm,
and if they
yeah.
had any critical or high whatever findings. If you do that, then you need to do that the second a new model comes out. And that's, I think, the thing that is maybe has not been common practice. So like the CoinKite guys have said, I don't know if it's true, but they've said that they've run AI models on the code. I think this only happened because no one had run AI models on their code in the last few weeks. Because like in the last few weeks, we've had, for example, just a few days before this happened, the new Kimmy model came out. And if you were a malicious actor and you said find a vulnerability in the Coldcard code base and write the exploit to steal the funds, Kimmy will do that for you. And the other models won't do that for you. The other models will find the vulnerability, but they will not write the exploit typically. And
Yeah.
so this, I think, only happened so suddenly because of the release of that model, and that's just a guess, and other folks have kind of guessed the same way, talking about it on X. But I do believe the CoinKite guys that if, let's say 2 months ago, they ran like one of the new GPT or Claude models on their code base, I don't know if it would have caught it, because up until recently, the models have not been good about what we call embedded engineering, which is like firmware for hardware. If there's a bug in a single library, it'll be okay at finding that. But when you have two different libraries where like one is calling the other, in this case, one was calling this libngu and libngu is doing something and sending it back, the intersection between these libraries is where the models historically have not been very good, because they have a hard time keeping enough in their context window to kind of figure everything out. And that's changing now fast. And so I do think there's just like a development, your development style, your to-do list, your checklist before you make a code release is now going to involve running all the frontier models against your code base with specific prompts to try to get them to review everything. And if a new model comes out, you better rerun it against all your stuff again. And so that's what we're doing. And I think that's just going to become best practice moving forward.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, this radical transparency that we talked about, it makes the risks more visible. And but I also think it's very interesting, right? If when you disclose them, you fix them, you share which model, right? Like that's, I think, the whole part of the the open source ethos, right? But there's also people that are now saying, self custody is dead. To just use a spare iPhone. And I also think because of the transparency, right? Like people will also see kind of how risky everything is, right? Like I think Bitcoin in self custody is the revolution of Bitcoin, right? And I think there's a lot of people that are working toward helping people do that in the correct way. But I do think like this event, right, will also steer a lot of people to just choose convenience, with a third party custody instead of actually owning it. What are your thoughts around like these initial reactions, and maybe also, what's the long term impact on that dynamic for Bitcoin?
Yeah, I think this has set Bitcoin self custody back significantly. And already self custody across the whole crypto space is barely a fraction of all users. I mean, if you try to piece together the number of hardware wallets that have been sold total, you could look at like Ledger being assume Ledger has like 80% of the market. I think that's kind of fair, or at least over 50%. I don't think they've self-reported more than 8 million or so devices sold. And then Trezor has said a couple million in a more recent statement. I think they said over 2. I mean, are there even 15, 1.5 million people worldwide that have hardware wallets? And how many people have more than one? Like, I have a bunch, and I know most folks have, several if they've been in the space for a while. So are there like 5 million people out there with hardware? I mean, it's a tiny drop in the bucket compared to the total number of Bitcoin users or crypto users. And so I do worry significantly that this event has caused such it's rational fear. It's not irrational. Like, it makes sense, right? It's caused so much fear that we're going to have to do what we can to try to, address those fears and show that, our security is sound. And I think it's easier to do that by being open source and focusing on that transparency. I do not think self-custody is dead, but I do think that this definitely set back the industry. I think that I'm not saying that single sig or multi-sig, like, I'm not sure exactly what the answer is, but I do know that one thing that I've been talking about for years is the user experience challenges of all this. And paradoxically, I think there was a subset, or even maybe not a subset, maybe a large number of folks in the Bitcoin media where the school of thought was, if it's hard to use, it's almost like a rite of passage. If it's janky, if it has a difficult UI, like that signals somehow security. And like, you should watch my 25 tutorial videos for how to set up a hardware wallet. And one of our jokes, which is, I mean, it's kind of unfortunate, is that the reason why so much of the Bitcoin media liked Coldcard devices is because it gives you infinite source of tutorials. Like, there's so much you have to teach people, right, how to use it, that I can, Coldcard, I can make 100 videos for, how to use Coldcard. And on one hand, some of the hardcore folks are vindicated because they pushed for dice rolls, right, for lengthy passphrases, for multi-vendor multi-sig. And so on one hand, you have like the hardcore people are like, see, the lesson that we should take away from this is to make anyone coming into self-custody go through all that. And if you are hardcore and you can do that and you can figure that out, I mean, of course you should create your own seed, right? Of course you should take that personal responsibility. But that's like one end of the spectrum, right? The other end of the spectrum is all the people that are going to see that and say, I should just put my coins in the ETF or in Coinbase, right? And so I think that, my strong belief is to combine the self-custody with the approachability and ease of user experience. And I don't think there's many offerings out there that have the right trade-offs. And I think there's going to be a lot of stuff that we got to build in the coming months and years.
Every Bitcoiner hits this moment. You need cash, maybe for a house deposit, an emergency, or a tax bill, and you're staring at your stack thinking, do I really want to sell this? Here's the thing, you don't have to. You can borrow against your Bitcoin instead, so there's also no taxable event and your stack can keep on stacking. This is where Firefish comes in, a peer-to-peer marketplace for Bitcoin-backed loans. And Firefish is not a lender. They built a protocol that makes this all possible, which is exactly why they never, ever have to touch your Bitcoin. During your loan, your Bitcoin sits in an on-chain multisig secured by open source code. You can find offers for different amounts, durations, and rates at firefish.io. And when you decide to get a loan, you can use code BRAM to get 30% off your first loan's fees. That's firefish.io and code BRAM.
Yeah, I think it's definitely clear that there's no one design that fits all. But I kind of feel like Bitcoin is now, also because of this happening in this, and people are talking about Bitcoin financialization, etc. Like, I feel we're in this space between early adopters and like early majority. Maybe not even at the end of early adopters, right? But it's just the bigger group of people has way different needs and wants with regard to how to use Bitcoin or what Bitcoin is for, right? Or totally understanding the whole philosophical narrative and everything behind it, right? And I think we talked about it before, and why I also initially got a passport, right? Like, I love that you want to make it more simple, but I also see conversations on X, right, where people say like, well, getting in shape is not easy, right? Or getting wealthy is not easy, right? Or like, there were some examples. And although I also don't agree with, bad UX makes, shows it's secure or whatever. But I do think, because in the context of what you're doing with the device, right? You're securing Bitcoin. I almost want to say, like, there has to be a learning curve. Like, if it's too easy, right? Yeah, and that's what people see. People talk about BitKey, for example, right? Like, oh, BitKey has a blah 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 user experience. I haven't used it. I would love to try it out, right? But but some people say like, well, the first device of the BitKey didn't even have a screen, right? So you didn't even see what happened. But it's easy. Like, it's super quick. Like, the onboarding is super quick, right? And so I just think this trade-off is very interesting, because eventually, and I wonder what you think, like, people do have to understand like how important the thing is that they're doing using the device, right? Like, the device is a tool to eventually do something. There's like a job to be done, right? I want to secure my own Bitcoin in self-custody because these and these reasons. So that trade-off between, whales versus normies versus privacy maximalists versus just, general people that don't want to lose their keys. There's no one size fits all, but like it's different than just setting up a phone, right? Or I don't know, like a smart TV or whatever. So how do you think about that? Like, do you understand the tension I'm describing?
Do.
And
yeah. And so it's funny. I have right after this podcast, I have like a design call. We have weekly design calls. What we try to do at Foundation, I think, is we try to have what we call the happy path, which is like the path for the normies, the fast onboarding. Right now it's doing a backup to 2 NFC key cards, and it's storing a third key on our mobile app, encrypted in your iCloud account, and doing what we call magic backups. And it makes it really fast and easy for folks to get onboarded. But then there's the hardcore people that are like, no, absolutely not. I'm not doing that at all. And then we have the advanced button, on the screen when you set it up. And you can choose to skip that. You can do your seed words. You can bring your own seed. You can auto-generate the 12th or 24th word so that you can roll your own seed, offline and import it into the device. And there's a tension even within the company, because if we prioritize both paths equally, we wouldn't have, I don't know if we would have even yet shipped our current, Passport Prime product, which started shipping back in the end of March. And so there's this tension of, well, are we developing the happy path? Are we building out more advanced features? And we're trying to constantly balance that, because our goal is that we want to have the ability for new users to come in and get set up really fast in a secure, opinionated way. And that opinionated way is our opinion. It's how I and the team think a new user that's, pretty new to Bitcoin should come in and get set up and backed up, so that they're not going to make any mistakes, right? So they're not going to hurt themselves. They're not going to lose their backup. They're not going to screw up their seed word generation, anything like that. But I do think Bitcoin companies should be supporting like the advanced path as well. And that includes like as open source as possible, transparency, reproducible builds so that advanced users can verify what firmware is actually running on the device, a way when you boot up the device to check the hashes of the firmware. So you have, guarantees about what it's doing, and other advanced features like that. And our approach is to do both of those, and they're always in tension, always in tension. What I've seen from other companies in the space is to pick one, right? So Coldcard is a great example of picking the path of going for every advanced feature under the sun, but not having like a happy path, an easy path for new Bitcoiners to onboard, and therefore requiring lots of tutorials and learning and all this stuff. BitKey is an example of going in the other direction, right? Of building something that, in my opinion, for the first version was traded off security for convenience. And I think has a better balance for the current version with the screen, their second generation. But I'm still not happy with the fact that you get locked into this walled garden ecosystem. And then like Ledger is another example of just saying, we just want you to use like our Ledger Live software, and we're just doing our own thing in our walled garden ecosystem. And like, if you want to integrate with it, you can use this one way of doing it, and that's it. And so every company has its own set of trade-offs, and our driving force here at Foundation has always been to make it with a happy path, make it where it's easy for the newcomers, but then still offer the advanced features that are just like a tap away.
I shared with someone we both know. I'll share afterwards that we were talking, and that I really supported your transparency message, and he's quite big on like how all the wallets work, etc. And he said, "Okay, please ask Zach the following question."
Okay.
Like the connection, but so you moved like the Passport Prime. The Core. I think that's the one I have, just like the previous one. That was strictly air gapped, and you could connect it to the wallet, right? But it was also like straight to Sparrow. I'm not sure if that's also with the Prime.
You can, you could still do it with QR code to Sparrow if you want to on Prime.
Yeah. So like, do you need a phone? His biggest question was like, do you require a phone, right? Because a lot of people treat the phone in general is probably like a primary attack surface for just any person, right? And he thought that was like a big concern. So I just wonder if you can share, like, I partially agree, but I don't have enough like knowledge around it. But I agree with the idea of the phone being a possible issue.
Well, even zooming out more, a lot of folks have been asking me the last few days, why did we stop with the QR code air gap as the primary means of communication? Like, we were the first mainstream device that had the QR code air gap. So I met the Spectre DIY guys in like 2019 or something at an MIT Bitcoin event. And they were showing me this giant, Spectre DIY thing with air gap QR codes. And then I listened to a Michael Flaxman podcast as well that year, which was called like Why Every Bitcoin Hardware Wallet Sucks. And I saw it recirculating actually in the last couple of days.
Yeah, I saved that one to listen to.
That was formative for me. When we started Foundation, those were my two inputs. It was that podcast and it was meeting the Spectre DIY guys. And then we worked with the nonprofit Blockchain Commons to push forward that UR standard, which is what most of these universal resources, it's the air gap QR code, the animated QR code standard. And so most of the devices use, like, people forget that Foundation was in the trenches in 2020, 2021, pushing every single wallet, starting with Blue Wallet, to adopt that standard. And now they all have it, right? I remember working with Sparrow to getting them to go from the beta, which was UR1, to the real one, which was UR2, and then pushing everyone for adoption of that. So like, I hope we've established some credibility coming from like one of the first like mass market device, right? Where we're manufacturing them, you could buy them, that has the QR code air gap. We also have supported many thousands of customers with the QR code air gap. And we've done many in-person events. Like I remember sitting down at PubKey, teaching people how to use the QR code air gap. It is very unintuitive. Folks who are using it for the first time, holding their phone or looking at their computer, holding Passport, and like, okay, so I scan it on this, I scan it on that. Have you ever decoded the QR codes coming out of Passport? Like, have you ever pointed have you tried to turn them into human readable, text and figure out
really?
what there's...
Okay. Yeah.
You know what I mean? So that's another thing. So I want to be really careful that I'm a huge proponent of that. Like, we helped create that standard, yet I don't think it provides the security or user experience guarantees. And I don't think even the most hardcore users are verifying what is being displayed on these QR codes, because you'd have to like decode them. What we did was also I should say, as Bitcoin evolves, there's certain things that are very difficult to do with an air gap. So there's like, as we move into transactions that have much larger numbers of inputs, like if you were trying to do a Bitcoin lending type thing. So we're working with a company right now that's doing Bitcoin lending denominated in Bitcoin, fully self custodial, which is so cool. You don't have to trust another party. They require that you sign like dozens of PSBTs at once.
Yeah.
You can't do that with QR codes. There's all these things you can't do with QR codes. You can't do the anti-klepto stuff in a good way with QR codes, which is a whole nother technology to kind of make sure that the hardware wallet is not doing a certain kind of attack. And so at the same time, the wireless communications like Bluetooth are very convenient, but I do not trust Bluetooth at all, right? Like, I don't trust it at all. So what we want to do was like, we figured out an architecture with Passport Prime that we call Quantum Link. We named it, that allows you to leverage the convenience of Bluetooth as like wireless communication. But the Bluetooth is literally on a different chip on the circuit board. And our main operating system will not accept any incoming communication from the Bluetooth chip unless it comes over our Quantum Link protocol. And it basically creates a tunnel through the Bluetooth protocol. So we're not relying on the Bluetooth protocol for any encryption. We're not relying on the Bluetooth protocol for any security. It's basically just transporting an already encrypted packet of data. And the way that you establish the quantum link connection is with an air-gapped QR code scan. So you basically, you use the air-gapped QR code initially to bootstrap this end-to-end encrypted tunnel that's flowing through the Bluetooth chip. So you get the benefits of the wireless comms, but everything is like an end-to-end encrypted tunnel. The operating system, KOS, decides what messages to accept and what messages to reject. Just like how, by the way, if you opened up a Passport Core and you scanned an animated QR code that contained a malicious payload, Passport Core would refuse to accept that message. So like, you can get a malicious payload through anything. It doesn't really matter if it's QR code or not. And so I hope that gives some, better explanation. But I understand why it makes people uncomfortable, because you've been told, Bluetooth bad, wireless bad for so many years. But that's also where we benefit from the open source. And so all the code for KOS, right, is open source and reproducible. It's running on the hardware. You can verify the hashes. You can ask your AI, hey, how does this quantum link protocol work? Hey, can you compare this to the QR code air gapping? I think for a lot of these upcoming Bitcoin applications that people will start to understand over time, that it makes sense that we're able to have the wireless comms. I think it's going to be a big benefit, but we did not just rely on the Bluetooth chip. And some companies do rely on just the Bluetooth chip and the Bluetooth protocol. And I don't think that's good. And so like, we did it in a way that we're really comfortable with. It effectively is, I don't want to call it an air gap, but you're bootstrapping this post-quantum encrypted tunnel. And it's actually using post-quantum encryption. It's not like some BS like quantum ready. You're bootstrapping it with an air-gapped QR code scan.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because this question just also comes from the fact that a lot of information is just available, right? And there's people that have certain perception of, whatever technology or whatever protocol you're using. That kind of ties back to what I mentioned before. Like, people buy a phone from Apple and it's like, but it's Apple, right? Like, but literally no clue. Like, you never read any agreement, no statement. You cannot look into the hardware, like nothing of that, right?
Nothing. Yeah.
And so that's why, in my mind, it's like if you go to opposite of the spectrum, it's where the questions actually arise just because there is information. Does that make sense? Right? Like, it's like the people are looking for. Yeah, the people that find that important are looking for it, and therefore they have more questions, and therefore you're perhaps grilled more.
But there's,
and that's a good thing, I would say. Like, that's what you would want to invite. I think, especially after this whole Coldcard thing.
For sure, but I also think there's like two sides of the spectrum. Like, there's almost two completely different takeaways that you could get out of this, this event that happened with Coldcard. Like, one is, as I was saying before, the hardcore people are right. And you should go through even greater lengths to be like as hardcore as possible, right? You should be like rolling your dice, multi-vendor, multi-sig, doing everything under like aluminum foil and a Faraday cage, living in a Faraday cage, right? Like full extreme. And you know what? You'd probably be right. I mean, you'll be safe if you do that. Like, you will. The other end of the spectrum is like, well, Coldcard had all these features. You had your 9-volt battery, your physical keys, your duress pin, your what did they call it when you can combine the two seeds that everyone keeps asking us for? Whatever. They had every advanced feature under the sun, and then they messed up like the most simple, obvious thing. Yeah. And so I think what we're seeing play out is we're seeing a lot of folks go for that hardcore angle. And I think it's going to turn away a lot of newcomers. I think it's going to turn away most people. And what Foundation wants to do is try to make it as easy as possible for the hardcore people to verify that we are being honest. Right? Like, because if the hardcore folks can verify that Foundation is being honest, that the firmware is open source, that the firmware is reproducible, that many people have looked at it, that you can trust that the firmware running on your device matches, what we're saying is open source on GitHub, then you can have confidence that like you can use our products and you don't have to go through those incredible lengths. And so it's hard because I think both takeaways are simultaneously true, and that makes it really difficult. And it also makes it really dangerous because if I was only listening to those people right now on like the X spaces that I've been participating in, then Foundation would be like making the devices so unapproachable to most people that they're just not going to use them. And then you're kind of dooming your own company because now you have like 1,000 people as your maximum total audience. But you're also dooming everyone else to just go be storing their coins on the exchange.
Well, it's also, and this is the tension that I'm seeing is like, okay, what is the end of early adopter Bitcoin, right? Maybe 1,000 people is
that wasn't a real number. Yeah,
I know. But there is a number. There is a limit to the number, right? And I shared a video by I think it was Fractal Encrypt, and he showed like how he was rolling dice and doing it on like this. I mean, if if you say like, you need to roll dice and then, you can secure, this amount of Bitcoin or whatever. But the cool thing, at least for me, but that's more my point, right? Like if you can spend 60 minutes max, very focused, right? And you're just doing the dice roll, you have an open source machine and all these things, right? If you just do that one time, 60 minutes, right? You can basically disappear as an atom into the universe with what you're creating, right? And in that way you can actually use Bitcoin as the subversion against the fiat money system, etc., etc., etc. And I saw that and I reshared that, and then I was thinking like, but it's only because I have a certain picture of Bitcoin that I see that the ridiculousness of throwing dice to secure XYZ million or billions or whatever is actually the way to go, was just a really interesting signal for me to realize what you just said. Like, this is not for everyone, or it's going to take a long time before way more people actually understand, hey, if I want to use Bitcoin like this, then I should also take that ownership of setting it up like that, right? And I think that the hardcore people should understand that even though they're probably right, you want to disappear as an atom into the universe in that probability. It's just not how we get another 100 million people to adopt Bitcoin, right? So that is exactly like the tension I'm seeing now is between like, yes, you're right. Yes, the people that rolled dice, that had a Coldcard, they are still safe. And, it's all true. And Bitcoin got here because of this. And I think it got a lot of people, including me, into this kind of like cypherpunky thinking, right? I'm not 100% cypherpunk person, maybe 25% or whatever, but they got me there, right? Even that Fractal Encrypt guy, he has gloves on, right, for OPSEC and whatever. And we're here with our real face, like that's how far away I am from being a cypherpunk. But, I think this is what people are realizing. And I think it's a similar subject with, Bitcoin financialization and stuff like that. What do you think about like where we're at? Does that make sense? Is that what you see as the path, or do you have resistance to that as well?
I don't know. Well, firstly, I think we're even earlier than most people think we are. I mean, I think if you think about that crossing the chasm type thing, which you were referencing before, which is like
that's 13% or 16%.
I don't even think we're close to that. And that's why I think this is a dangerous moment, because I do not want to end up in a place where like 0.01% of all people self-custody. I just don't. And so it's like, it's an imperative now to make sure that we can provide a user experience. And specifically when I say user experience, I also mean like a setup and backup experience, where a lot more people can join in, can quickly get set up and backed up in a secure way. and can have confidence that, obviously, of course, that the seed was generated correctly. And that's also why a lot, I want to focus on making sure that other companies in the space are making it possible for the hardcore users to do the verification, right? Because it's the don't trust, verify. But like, you need to do certain things as a company making this kind of product to make it even possible for the hardcore people to verify.
Yeah.
And I was just talking about that on a Twitter Spaces earlier and discussing with like Shinobi and Wicked, like how can Foundation make it possible where you can trust us that like every bit of code running on our hardware exactly matches the code that's on the GitHub. It's a non-trivial problem. Can it be done? Yes. Might it even need like new hardware or new chips or something to make that possible? Like maybe, but I'm very interested in focusing on in those directions and then also of course supporting the advanced user functionality that they want, because I think my guess is the next, I don't want to say crisis, but I think folks will turn a lot of this don't trust, verify attention towards Ledger as well in the coming months. I think any company that's refusing to fully open source the stack in this AI era is going to be faced with like a lot of user resistance. And I want to try to, when I think about what we're trying to do with Foundation, I'm not just thinking about, can we sell some certain number of Passport devices? I mean, we called the company Foundation, and I've been talking about it since 2020 because we want to be like the open source hardware underpinning of the entire industry. And so like there's primitives that we need to offer to the advanced users in order to allow them to verify what we're doing. And I'm very interested in that kind of stuff. So most people are talking about dice rolls. I'm thinking about, how do we allow people to verify that what's running on the hardware matches what they think is running on the hardware? In my mind, that is like the most important kind of things that vendors should be talking about. The other thing I'm thinking about, and we're talking to others, is how can all the wallet companies work together? Like, if we find a bug in each other's code, or someone does, like, we need to be able to like communicate that to all of us immediately, and we need to be able to like compete with each other while also having like a direct line for this kind of these kinds of events.
Yeah.
And whether that looks like some kind of industry group or some kind of something, there's plenty of examples from other industries, and there's examples even from like the crypto industry. Block organized this crypto open patent alliance called COPA that like Block, Coinbase, there's all these big industry members. Foundation isn't a member of that. So there are these groups. And so I think there's an opportunity to turn this like Bitcoin red team signal group that's been helping so many people and companies and everything. There's an opportunity to turn that into some kind of like industry rapid response group to be able to help each other out.
Yeah. What I absolutely love is that I've been talking about this a lot. Like, there's some properties of Bitcoin that emanate on like and are like a fractal on like different levels, right? Like something like proof of work, or like the forced transparency. And another one is what Jeff Booth talked about, right? He says, a fiat money system is a zero sum game, or even a negative sum game, right? If someone wins, someone else loses, etc. But like in a Bitcoin economy, it's cooperative competitiveness.
Yeah.
So you all have the same goal to propagate Bitcoin into the future, use Bitcoin, etc. Right? But and it's cooperative because everyone is contributing to Bitcoin. But there's also competitiveness that just naturally should be there in a free market, right? And like what you just said made me think of that, and I think it is also that, right? Like, so it also seems like this very dark moment in Bitcoin is actually also a seed for perhaps the cooperative competitiveness and setting an example, which overall I would say makes the industry stronger, right? Like, you cannot really act, I think, like CoinKite acted before, what we talked about, right? Being, source viewable or being closed source, like you mentioned Ledger.
Yeah.
This will ask something from the companies that are providing in this
Yeah,
space.
and I don't want to be too controversial, but I don't think it's a coincidence that the one company or the one CEO that was being the most toxic, the most hostile, the most defamatory is also the one who had this bug. And that's the case. So I've seen so many people, even today, like accounts with big followers, say that the hardware wallet industry is filled with infighting, that it's like petty, criticizing me for speaking openly about this, saying things about NVK or Coldcard, criticizing the behavior, and saying like the hardware wallet, saying things like the hardware wallet industry needs to stop this infighting. I just want to say officially here first, for the first time, there has been no infighting. None. There's been one company that was the source of an enormous amount of toxicity and just massive amounts of defamation targeted at a handful of projects or companies. Besides that, like Foundation talks with all the other hardware wallet companies or has a good relationship. Whether it's interacting with them in public, like I was just having a back and forth conversation about open source. You can go look at it on X with the Ledger CTO, Charles. I have DM'd or talked with the Trezor folks. We've talked with the Bitbox folks. We're talking with the Blockstream folks right now about collaborating on things. We talk with everyone. Even though I don't agree with Ledger's approach, we interact with them in like a respectful way. I wrote a whole blog post about BitKey a couple of years ago about how, like, a pretty critical blog post. I don't think they were happy about the blog post, and they've resolved the issues that I brought up in this blog post over the last couple of years. And I go and chat with them at conferences, shake their hands, talk to them, sit down with folks at Block for coffee in person when they're in Boston. Like, there's a huge amount of collaborative efforts behind the scenes. So there is no hardware wallet infighting. Like, and I think there's going to be even more collaboration and maybe even more formal collaboration moving forward after this, right? Trying to maybe codify this into some kind of organization or rapid response group or something like that. But I just want to say that here because I haven't said it anywhere else before. Just from my personal experience, even if I don't agree with them all, like everyone is they're real people, they're nice people, they're wonderful to work with and talk to. And I think they mean well. I just don't always agree with their approach, but like we all talk, right? And both in public and private. And this was a very specific instance of just NVK being massively toxic. And for some reason, people think that means that the hardware wallet space is toxic, and it's not.
Yeah, I think it's great that you shared that. I also want to say, like, just this whole response, I think just in general in Bitcoin, the infighting or like the amount of discourse, I would say, right, it's also kind of fueled by, boring price action or whatever, right? And I just think like people look for other stuff to talk about, right? Because we cannot all post happy memes, told you so stuff. But actually seeing this, this is, I would say, the biggest crisis or thing that I've experienced in Bitcoin.
Yeah.
I wasn't really there with like a block size wars or whatever, like all the stuff that happened there. That's when I was distracted. So, now I'm seeing this, and it's actually so incredibly cool to see how many extremely smart and diligent people are actually in the Bitcoin corner. And maybe to add on to what you said, I also want to emphasize, like, I think we forget that a lot. Like a lot of people, like you're more in the weeds than me, maybe I'm more in the weeds than another person, right? But like for me, it's so cool to see what type of people are actually in Bitcoin's corner and like how selfless they are and spending their own money, right? And just sharing or putting their face on the internet even, right? making themselves a target or a person of interest or whatever. I think it's very brave and admirable, right? And it's just really, really cool to see that even in a decentralized tech or community, there is pretty much an aligned vision for probably like 80% of all the stuff, I would say. At least it's my perception, right? And that already, if you do compare that to any other industry, that might be interesting to see how aligned it is in all these other places. So I think in general, despite all the infighting and discussions and whatever, I think people are pretty much aligned on Bitcoin.
And have come together just to help so many people, right? And
Yes.
and there's so much going on behind the scenes, especially on like the security audit side. There's this red team that actually one of our team members started the Signal group, which is really cool. And they've been going around and trying to help as many people as possible and report AI assisted bug hunting and responsibly disclose and report those to other projects and companies. There's a lot of great efforts going on behind the scenes. I do think for most people this is the worst crisis, for them. The only thing I could think that was worse is like Mt. Gox collapse originally. I got into Bitcoin just before that in December 2013 personally, and I didn't have enough Bitcoin where it mattered, and I got my first Bitcoin on Coinbase, and so I wasn't exposed to that, but that was, I think, a formative event in the sense that it impacted so many of the hardcore ultra early adopters. And even with like the fork, wars and like the UASF stuff and everything back in the day, there was no like loss of funds. I mean, you could have chosen to move all your funds to one of the two chains, I guess you could say. But that's like a conscious choice. That's like an investment decision. There was no loss of funds for anyone. So I think this was the most scarring event that I can think of, especially because it disproportionately impacted the most hardcore people. And like those people are the ones who were hurt the most.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
And I know you have to go, so I want to ask you my last question. For the average person who just wants to own their Bitcoin without becoming, full-time security researcher, having this new knowledge or seeing what has happened, what would you tell them is like the single highest leverage thing that they can do differently than maybe they did before after listening to us?
Yeah, I want to be careful. I don't want to just like shill our own products. I think that one is using products that are free and open source, free and open source software, hardware, purchasing from companies that have those products that help strengthen the entire industry. If you can, obviously, if you're an advanced user and you feel comfortable generating your own seed words, I think you should definitely do that. But I would say you don't have to be afraid. All of the current hardware wallets have been now audited. I'm very confident that for all the open source, wallets out there, that there are not entropy or seed generation bugs. I don't think there's any reason to panic. I think the biggest takeaway is still do not be afraid of self-custody after this. And there's many great options to get onboarded into the space. I want to emphasize that this event was horrible, but it was caused by negligence of a specific vendor. And that does not mean that there's anything wrong with the other companies in the space that have been working for years tirelessly to try to make self-custody, more accessible to everyone. So definitely don't trust, verify is a big one. And the other thing is, which is really cool, is even if you're not technical, you can now use AI to ask questions to really help you compare across the different products out there. Drill in, ask it to review the code, ask it questions if you have. And I think everyone could definitely adopt more of that don't trust, verify, mindset at this point in time, which I think is great overall.
Yeah, for sure. All right, man. Well, thank you so much for your time and your insights, and we'll stay in touch. Thanks.
Thanks.
I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, you can click here to find more just like it, and click here to find all Bitcoin for Millennials podcast episodes. Also, if you want to help me shine a light on the message of Bitcoin, please like this video and subscribe to stay connected. I hope to see you for our next episode. Bye.